This video is created for storytelling while the real names, locations, and identifying information have been changed to protect the privacy and dignity of the individuals and families involved. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Daniel Mercer was the kind of man people trusted without thinking twice. At 37, he wore his uniform like it was part of his identity, not just a job. He served as a tactical officer in a regional police unit in northern England, handling everything from organized rural crime to high-risk interventions. To outsiders, he was disciplined, composed, and dependable, the kind of officer you'd want showing up when things went wrong. But long before the badge, Daniel's life had been simple. He grew up in a quiet village surrounded by farmland and cold sea winds. His father repaired engines in a small garage, and his mother taught at the local primary school. There wasn't much money, but there was structure, expectations, responsibility. Daniel absorbed all of it. As a teenager, he stood out, not because he was loud or rebellious, but because he wasn't. He volunteered at community drives, helped organize local events, and spent weekends assisting elderly neighbors. People described him as steady, reliable, the kind of young man who already seemed older than his years. That sense of duty followed him into adulthood. After finishing a degree in criminology in Manchester, he joined the police force. He adapted quickly. Within a few years, his supervisors began to notice something about him. Under pressure, he didn't panic. He calculated. He made decisions others hesitated to make. By his early 30s, he had built a solid reputation. He worked in busy urban districts before transferring to a specialized rural response unit. There, he dealt with crimes most people never thought about: illegal hunting operations, smuggling networks, and violent land disputes. It was dangerous work, but he thrived in it. And somewhere along the way, he started thinking about something else: a family. He met Laura in 1994 at a mutual friends gathering. She was 32, confident, and sharply intelligent. She worked as an administrative coordinator for a local council and carried herself with quiet independence. Unlike others who were drawn to Daniel's uniform, Laura seemed more interested in the man behind it. That intrigued him. Their connection formed quickly. Walks along the coastline turned into long conversations about life, ambition, and stability. Laura had a way of grounding him, of slowing down the intensity that defined his work, and Daniel, in return, offered a sense of security she had always valued. Within a year, they were married. Their wedding was small, just close family, a few friends, and the kind of warmth that comes from genuine connection rather than grand gestures. Not long after, they welcomed their first child, then another and another. From the outside, it looked like a life carefully built to perfection. Daniel continued rising through the ranks. Laura balanced her career while raising their children. Their home was filled with the usual chaos of a growing family: school mornings, birthday parties, weekend outings. Neighbors admired them. Friends pointed to them as an example of stability. But perfection rarely tells the full story. The change didn't happen all at once. It never does. At first, it was subtle. Daniel started asking more questions: where Laura was going, who she was meeting, why she was late. It didn't feel threatening at the beginning, just concern, or at least that's how it was framed. Then the tone shifted. Questions became expectations. Expectations became rules. Laura noticed it before anyone else did: the way his voice changed during arguments, the way small disagreements turned into something heavier, more intense. There was an edge to him now that hadn't been there before. Still, she stayed, because leaving isn't always simple. Over time, Daniel's behavior grew more unpredictable. At work, he remained composed, professional, focused. But at home, the control tightened. He monitored her movements, criticized her decisions, isolated her from certain friends under the excuse that they were bad influences. The children noticed too. They learned when to stay quiet, when to avoid eye contact, when to disappear into their rooms. Then one night, everything crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. Laura was pregnant with their fourth child when an argument escalated. No one remembers what it started over, something small, something ordinary, but Daniel lost control. He struck her, not once, but hard enough to leave bruises across her shoulder and chest. The shock of it was almost worse than the pain, because in that moment she realized something terrifying. This wasn't temporary, it was the beginning. After that, the violence didn't disappear. It became part of their reality. Sometimes it was physical, other times it was intimidation, raised voices, threats, objects thrown across rooms. There were moments when Daniel would stand in the doorway, blocking her exit, his presence alone enough to make her stop moving. He didn't need to touch her every time. Fear did the rest. The children lived in that fear with her. They heard everything, the shouting, the crashes, the silence that followed. Laura changed, slowly but completely. The confident woman Daniel had met years ago became cautious, measured, always thinking 2 steps ahead, trying to prevent the next explosion before it happened. People outside didn't see it. They saw the uniform, the smile, the family photos. They didn't see what happened behind closed doors. By mid-2001, Laura reached a point where she couldn't ignore it anymore. Years of tension had built into something unbearable. She knew staying meant continuing the cycle, but leaving carried its own risks. Still, she made a decision. She told Daniel she wanted a divorce. The reaction was immediate. There was no discussion, no attempt at understanding, just anger, raw and uncontrolled. His sense of authority, the control he had built over years, was slipping, and he couldn't accept it. The argument turned violent again, this time worse than before. He grabbed her, his hands tightening around her throat. The room blurred, the air disappeared. Laura struggled, but it wasn't enough. The world went dark before she could break free. What saved her wasn't strength, it was chance. A neighbor heard the noise and intervened. That interruption, brief as it was, pulled Daniel back just enough for Laura to survive. But survival didn't mean safety. After that night, the fear became something deeper, more urgent. Laura understood now that leaving wasn't just about starting over, it was about staying alive. And yet, even then, the path forward wasn't clear, because Daniel wasn't just an abusive husband, he was a police officer, and that changed everything. In the days that followed, Laura confided in a few close people. She admitted things she had kept hidden for years, his temper, the control, the violence. She spoke about incidents she had tried to rationalize before, things she had convinced herself would improve, but they hadn't. They had escalated. She also revealed something else, something complicated. During the breakdown of their marriage, she had formed a connection with someone at work. It wasn't something she was proud of, but it reflected how fractured her life had become. Daniel, meanwhile, grew more suspicious, more unstable. He accused her of betrayal repeatedly, despite his own history of infidelity. He began acting differently, watchful, calculating. He even started to believe he was monitoring her conversations, listening in when she wasn't aware. The tension in the house became unbearable. By late August, Laura made a plan. She would leave, take the children, start fresh in another town where she had family support. It wasn't perfect, but it was a way out. On August 25th, she told him, calmly, carefully. She explained everything, the move, the separation, the intention to sell the house. Daniel didn't accept it. He accused her again, questioned her motives, twisted the situation into something else entirely. But beneath the anger, there was something more dangerous building, something quieter, something unresolved. 2 days later, Laura made a phone call to her sister-in-law. Her voice wasn't panicked, but it wasn't calm either. There was a weight to it, a sense that something was off. She said Daniel had changed, not just angry, but different, unpredictable, and for the first time, she admitted she was truly afraid of what he might do next. That same evening, Daniel stopped at a local shop. He bought a length of rope. When the cashier asked what it was for, he gave a simple answer, something about moving furniture. It sounded ordinary, but it wasn't, because by then, something had already started to unravel, and no one, not Laura, not the neighbors, not even Daniel himself, fully understood how close everything was to breaking.
The night of August 28th began like any other. Quiet streets, dim porch lights, the kind of stillness that settles over suburban neighborhoods when people retreat into their homes after long days. Nothing about the evening suggested what was about to unfold inside the Mercer house. Daniel returned home just after sunset. Earlier, he had stopped by a local pub with colleagues. To anyone watching, he seemed normal, maybe quieter than usual, but nothing alarming. He even exchanged a few casual words with a neighbor before stepping inside. That was the last moment things felt ordinary. Inside the house, the tension was immediate. Laura could sense it the second he walked through the door. And there was no shouting at first, no visible anger, just a heavy silence that pressed into the walls. The children were home. The younger ones had been settling down, while the older two lingered nearby, aware of the fragile atmosphere. They had learned to read it over the years. Daniel sat for a while, barely speaking. Then something shifted. No one knows exactly what triggered it. Maybe it was the conversation they had days earlier. Maybe it was everything building at once. But whatever restraint he had left disappeared in an instant. The argument began fast and escalated faster. Voices rose, furniture moved, the sound of something striking the floor echoed through the house. Laura tried to keep her distance, tried to keep things from spiraling, but it was already too late. Daniel had lost control. The violence that followed was sudden and overwhelming. It wasn't a single outburst. It was sustained, chaotic, and terrifying. The kind of moment where time fractures, where seconds stretch and everything becomes instinct and fear. The children heard it, and this time, one of them ran. 6-year-old Emily burst out of the house barefoot and shaking and ran to the nearest neighbor. She was crying so hard her words barely made sense at first, but the message was clear enough. Something was terribly wrong. The neighbor didn't hesitate. They called the police immediately. Inside the house, the situation had already spiraled beyond anything that could be undone. By the time officers arrived, the scene was one of devastation. Laura was found in the kitchen unresponsive. The violence she had endured was severe, leaving no doubt about the intensity of what had happened. Nearby, the younger children had also been caught in the chaos, injured in ways that showed they had tried to protect themselves or each other. Upstairs, one of the older children was discovered alive, but barely conscious, curled tightly as if trying to disappear from what had taken place. Emily, the one who escaped, was outside with neighbors, physically unharmed but in complete shock. She kept repeating the same words over and over, her voice hollow with fear. Paramedics worked quickly, doing everything they could. The children who were still alive were rushed to the hospital. Every second mattered. But inside the house, there was nothing more that could be done for Laura. While emergency responders focused on the victims, officers began searching the property. That's when they noticed something else, a faint noise, unusual, coming from the garage. When they opened it, what they found brought the entire situation to a grim conclusion. Daniel Mercer was there, unresponsive. It was clear he had taken his own life. The man who had built a career on protecting others had become the source of unimaginable harm and then removed himself before facing any consequences. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly. What had seemed like a stable, respectable family unraveled into something far darker. Neighbors struggled to reconcile what they had seen for years with what had actually been happening behind closed doors. But the deeper investigation revealed something even more troubling. Laura had reached out for help before. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. There were records, calls made to authorities reporting incidents at home. In one case, she described being physically restrained during an argument. In another, she spoke about objects being thrown in front of the children. Each time, the situation was documented, but it wasn't escalated. Officers treated the incidents as domestic disputes rather than ongoing abuse. No formal intervention plan was created. No protective measures were enforced. The system that should have recognized a pattern saw isolated events instead. Even when the reports became more serious, the response didn't significantly change. Statements were taken, notes were filed, but nothing was done to remove Laura and her children from danger or to hold Daniel accountable in a way that might have interrupted the cycle. There were opportunities, moments where intervention could have altered the outcome, but those moments passed. In the aftermath, public scrutiny intensified. Questions were raised about how warning signs had been missed or ignored. Advocacy groups pointed out what experts had long emphasized. Patterns of coercive control and repeated violence rarely resolve on their own. Without intervention, they escalate. And in this case, escalation led to tragedy. The surviving children faced a long road ahead. Physical recovery was only part of it. The psychological impact of what they had experienced would stay with them far longer. Emily, the one who ran, became a quiet symbol of both survival and loss. Her decision to seek help likely saved lives, but it couldn't stop everything. Nothing could by that point. As investigators pieced together the timeline, one reality became impossible to ignore. Laura hadn't failed to act. She had tried. She had spoken up, reached out, endured, planned her escape, made decisions that required immense courage under constant fear. But the system around her didn't respond with the urgency her situation demanded. And Daniel, despite his role, his training, his public image, was never stopped. In the end, this wasn't just a story about one night. It was a story about everything that led up to it. The quiet control, the gradual isolation, the moments that seemed small until they weren't, the missed chances to intervene before the situation became irreversible. From the outside, the Mercer family looked like stability. Inside, it was something else entirely, and by the time the truth came to light, it was too late to change the outcome. That's the part that lingers. Not just what happened, but how close it came to being prevented. It started with a post that wasn't supposed to matter. At 2:17 a.m., buried between memes, late-night rants, and filtered selfies, a video quietly appeared on a small, barely followed account. No dramatic caption, no hashtags designed to go viral, just a shaky clip uploaded in poor lighting with a single line of text. "I don't think I can keep this secret anymore." For the first few hours, no one noticed. The account belonged to a 23-year-old university student named Rafiq Hossein, someone who rarely posted anything beyond occasional campus photos and sarcastic comments about exams. His follower count barely crossed 100. There was nothing about him that suggested he was about to set something in motion that would ripple far beyond his small circle. But by morning, everything had changed. It began with one share, then another. Someone screen recorded the video before it could be taken down. A larger page picked it up, reposted it with a caption that read, "What is this guy talking about?" Within hours, the clip was everywhere. In the video, Rafiq looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice uneven. He kept glancing off camera like he wasn't sure if he should continue, and then he said something that made people stop scrolling. "I was there the night Imran disappeared." That name alone was enough. Imran Chaudhry had gone missing 8 months earlier, a 26-year-old freelance photographer known locally for documenting street life in small communities. He wasn't famous, but he was known, the kind of person who had connections everywhere, vendors, artists, activists. When he vanished without a trace, it shook people. There had been searches, police reports, posters plastered on walls, but as weeks turned into months, attention faded. The case went cold. Until now. In the video, Rafiq continued speaking, his voice breaking at times. He didn't give a full explanation, not yet, but he said enough. "There were 4 of us. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. We thought he wouldn't fight back." The video ended abruptly after that. No names, no location, just fragments. But fragments were enough. Social media did what it does best. People began analyzing every second of the clip. Comments flooded in, some skeptical, some furious, some demanding answers. Old posts from Rafiq's account were dug up, his friends list was scanned, photos were zoomed into, backgrounds examined. Within hours, amateur investigators had started building theories. And then came the outrage. People weren't just watching anymore, they were demanding action. Protests began forming online. Influencers picked up the story, amplifying it to wider audiences. News outlets started reporting on the viral confession, bringing even more attention. Imran's family, who had spent months searching for answers, suddenly found themselves at the center of a storm. His younger sister gave a brief statement to local media. Her voice was steady, but her words carried weight. "We just want the truth. That's all we've ever wanted." Behind the scenes, the police investigation accelerated. Rafiq was eventually located 2 days later in a relative's house outside the city. He was taken into custody for questioning. Authorities didn't release details immediately, but sources confirmed that he had begun cooperating. And what he revealed shifted the case completely. It hadn't been planned. That was the first thing he said. According to Rafiq, the group had met Imran the night he disappeared. It started as a casual gathering, nothing unusual, but things escalated. An argument broke out, accusations, tension, and then violence. Rafiq claimed he hadn't intended for it to go that far. None of them had, but once it did, panic took over. Instead of calling for help, they made a different choice. They tried to erase what happened. The details were incomplete, but one thing was clear. Imran hadn't simply disappeared. Something had been done to him. And for 8 months, it had been hidden. The confession video, as it turned out, wasn't planned. Rafiq admitted he had been struggling with guilt. The pressure of keeping the secret had built over time. Sleepless nights, anxiety, fear that someone would eventually find out. So he spoke. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough for the internet to notice. Enough to reopen a case that had almost been forgotten. And now, as investigators worked to verify his claims and locate physical evidence, the entire country was watching. Because this wasn't just about one crime anymore. It was about how it had been exposed. Not through traditional investigation, but through a late-night confession that refused to stay buried. Once Rafiq started talking, the case stopped being speculation. It became structure. Investigators no longer had to rely on fragments from social media. They had a timeline, names, locations, enough to begin reconstructing what actually happened on the night Imran vanished. And the picture that emerged was worse than anyone had expected. According to Rafiq's full statement, the group had gathered at a rented house on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't unusual for them. They had met like this before. Late nights, music, alcohol, long conversations that stretched into early morning. Imran wasn't a stranger to them. He had known Adnan for years. The others were more recent connections, but familiar enough to feel comfortable around. That night, nothing seemed out of place at first, until it did. The argument started over something small, or at least that's how Rafiq described it. A disagreement that escalated quickly, voices raised, accusations thrown. No one could later agree on exactly what triggered it, but everyone agreed it spiraled out of control. Imran tried to leave. That was the turning point. What happened next wasn't one single act of violence. It was a chain reaction. One person blocked his way, another grabbed him, someone pushed, someone hit. And once it started, no one stopped it. Rafiq admitted he froze. He didn't throw the first punch. He didn't try to end it either. He just stood there, watching. By the time it was over, the room had gone quiet. Imran wasn't moving. At first, they thought he had just lost consciousness, that he would wake up, that it wasn't as serious as it looked. But minutes passed, and nothing changed. That's when panic took over. No one called for help. No one contacted emergency services. Instead, they made a decision that would define everything that followed. They agreed to hide it. Investigators later described that moment as the true point of no return. Up until then, there had been chaos, fear, poor decisions made in seconds. But what came next required time, planning, choice. Rafiq told them they wrapped the body, moved it, cleaned what they could. It wasn't professional, it wasn't thorough, but they believed it would be enough. They chose a location outside the city, somewhere quiet, somewhere they assumed no one would look. For months it worked. Imran was listed as missing. Searches were conducted, but without leads, the case stalled. Life for the four of them continued, on the surface, but underneath, things were unraveling. The group didn't stay united. They argued, avoided each other, blamed one another. Some tried to act normal, others withdrew completely. Rafiq was the first to break. He told investigators the guilt never left. It didn't fade over time. It grew. Every mention of Imran online, every post from his family, every unanswered question, it all added pressure. He stopped sleeping properly, started isolating himself, became paranoid that someone knew. But the others didn't want to talk about it. They wanted silence. That silence is what pushed him to post the video, not as a plan, not as a strategy, but as an escape. He didn't expect it to spread. He didn't expect people to analyze it, share it, and connect the dots. But once it did, there was no pulling it back. With Rafiq's confession on record, police moved quickly. Adnan was arrested first. He maintained his innocence initially, even after being confronted with the video, the messages, and the photo linking all of them together. But under sustained questioning, inconsistencies began to show. Then the others were taken in. Each one told a slightly different version of the same story, different details, different attempts to minimize their role, but the core facts aligned. The location Rafiq described was searched. It took time, hours of digging, but eventually investigators found what they were looking for. That discovery confirmed everything. Imran hadn't disappeared. He had been taken from the world by people he knew, people he trusted. The case, once cold, was now undeniable. Charges were filed, not just for the act of violence, but for everything that followed. The concealment, the coordination, the decision to let a family search for answers they already had. Public reaction intensified again, but this time it shifted. The outrage wasn't just about the crime, it was about the delay, the months of silence, the fact that the truth had been sitting just beneath the surface, waiting for one person to speak. Social media played a different role now. It wasn't just speculation, it became documentation. People tracked every update, shared every development, archived every statement. What had started as a chaotic flood of reactions turned into a sustained demand for accountability. During the trial, prosecutors focused on that turning point, the moment the group chose concealment over responsibility. They argued that while the initial violence may not have been planned, everything that followed was, and that made it worse. The defense attempted to divide responsibility, to separate actions, to argue that not everyone had the same level of involvement, but the evidence didn't allow for clean separation. Each one had participated, each one had stayed silent. Rafiq's video was presented in court, not as a confession in the legal sense, but as the spark that exposed everything, the moment the truth slipped out. Imran's family attended every session. They didn't speak publicly during the trial. They didn't need to. The weight of their presence said enough. When the verdict came, it was firm. All four were found guilty. Sentences varied depending on their level of involvement, but none of them would walk away free. For many, it felt like justice. For others, it felt incomplete, because no sentence could return what had been lost. After the trial, the conversation didn't end. If anything, it expanded. People began asking a different question, not just what happened, but how it came out. Because without that video, the case might have remained unsolved. Without the shares, the discussions, the outrage, Rafiq might never have been pushed to speak further. Authorities might not have had the pressure to act quickly. But social media is complicated. It exposed the truth. It also fueled speculation, harassment, and misinformation in the early stages. People were accused before evidence was confirmed. Names spread faster than facts. Still, in this case, it did something undeniable. It forced attention. It refused to let the story disappear. Imran's sister spoke again after the sentencing. This time, her words were quieter, more measured. "We didn't get him back," she said, "but at least now we know. At least now it's not just silence." That silence lasted 8 months, broken not by a planned investigation, but by a moment of guilt captured on a phone and amplified by millions. And that's what made this case different. Not just the crime, but the way it was dragged into the light, piece by piece, post by post, until there was nowhere left for it to hide.